The stars flickered in the darkness, 1,000 cold eyes watching from the void. Humanity had earned its place here at the edge of galactic peace, but only by the slimmest of margins. The Galactic Pact, a tenuous alliance between Earth and the alien powers that held sway over the galaxy, was fragile at best. Commander Elias leaned against the viewport of the warship Sovereign, staring out into the infinite expanse. 1,000 worlds, all filled with alien life, all of them now bound together under the same uneasy banner. But the illusion of peace was crumbling. Back on Earth, the Council of Earth Command continued its ceaseless negotiations. Endless speeches, closed-door meetings, diplomatic threads woven with the threads of time. And still the silence of peace held. Or at least, that's what the galaxy thought. What the Pact thought. In truth, the galaxy had never truly seen humanity. Not for what they were, not for what they were capable of. Humanity was seen as small, insignificant, a fading relic of a dying race, clutching desperately to whatever influence they could wrestle from the larger galactic players. But Elias knew the truth, and he felt it in his bones. He'd been to the edge of war too many times. He'd been the one to carry the burden of battle, the one to return when the others did not. And now, as the diplomatic threads strained and the first cracks appeared, he couldn't shake the feeling that history was about to repeat itself. Beside him stood General Nadia Morrow, arms crossed, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon of stars. She was a no-nonsense tactician, a product of the military machine that had kept Earth afloat through its darkest hours. Unlike Elias, who had seen war up close and preferred to bury the scars beneath layers of quiet reflection, Morrow wore her battle-hardened soul on her sleeve. She had seen too much to believe in diplomacy, not after all the promises of peace had been shattered time and time again. For Morrow, humanity was already a beast backed into a corner. And when a beast is cornered, it fights back. The cracks are showing, Elias, she said, her voice low, but cutting through the silence of the ship. The Pact's already on the verge of breaking. The resources are drying up. The Pact can't hold forever. They're not seeing us as equals. They're seeing us as expendable. Elias didn't answer at first, staring out at the stars, his fingers brushing against the glass. He wasn't afraid of the fight, but he wasn't ready to provoke it. Not yet. His instincts told him to wait, to see if diplomacy could still hold, if there was another way. But the longer he stared into the void, the more he felt the weight of those silent, distant stars pressing down on him. We've been forced into an alliance, he said, finally breaking the silence. But there's no reason to believe we're destined for war. We can still make peace work. We can still find a way out. Morrow's laugh was short, bitter. Peace? What peace, Elias? The kind that binds us in chains, with the Valari pulling the strings behind the scenes? She stepped forward, her voice a sharp contrast to his calm. I'm telling you, we're being used. The Valari have been feeding us lies, and every day that goes by, they're tightening their grip. The whole galaxy's watching, and what they see is a weak species that's easy to control. If we don't act, if we don't show them we're capable of standing our ground, we'll be forgotten. Elias felt a sting in her words, a sharp truth buried beneath the anger in her voice. He knew she was right. The Valari, an ancient race, long hidden in the shadows, had always been a specter in the background of galactic politics. Their influence was subtle, but growing. And the intelligence reports had started trickling in, suggesting something far worse than Elias had ever suspected. The Valari weren't just interested in controlling Earth. They were systematically dismantling humanity's resources, using Earth as a pawn in a grand scheme to consolidate their own power within the Pact. Elias didn't want to believe it. His entire life, he'd believed in the possibility of peace. in the notion that humanity could rise above its brutal past and make its place among the stars. But the cracks had become undeniable. Morrow's gaze softened for a moment, but only for a moment. Elias, you've been waiting for peace. I get it. But look around. It's already over. The galaxy's collapsing, and if we don't do something, we'll be swept away with it. Her words hit him harder than he expected. Peace had always been his shield, the only thing he had left from the horrors of his past. But now, with the truth closing in, it was clear that the shield wasn't enough. They couldn't keep waiting for a perfect solution that would never come. Elias clenched his fists, the anger slowly boiling inside him. The galaxy had watched humanity for centuries, seeing it as weak, a relic. But they didn't know what humanity was capable of. They didn't know the price humanity had paid to survive. They didn't understand what was at stake. As the quiet stretched between them, Elias finally spoke. His voice was firm, resolute. You're right, Nadia. Peace has failed, and I'm done waiting for it. Morrow nodded, a grim smile on her lips. Good, because this isn't a war we can fight with words. We're going to show them exactly what happens when humanity is pushed too far. And with that, the storm that had been brewing for so long finally began to break. The Sovereign drifted in the quiet shadows of the egress belt, where asteroid fields stretched like jagged teeth in the dark. The ship's engine hummed low, a deep, steady thrum that reverberated in the bones of its crew. Outside, the stars glimmered coldly, indifferent to the turmoil brewing on the ship's bridge. Inside, however, the atmosphere was anything but calm. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut through with a blade. Commander Elias Wren stood at the observation window, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes tracing the debris fields below. The calm before the storm, the phrase echoed in his mind, though he'd stopped believing it was a true sentiment long ago. There was no more quiet, no more waiting. The galaxy was on the brink of war, and humanity was being dragged into the fray, whether they liked it or not. His thoughts, once slow and reflective, were now sharp, agitated. Commander, reports are in. General Nadia Morrow's voice cut through the silence. Elias turned to face her. She was standing near the tactical display, a dark shadow against the dim lighting of the command deck. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable as she studied the flickering data. Another shipment of supplies has been intercepted, Morrow continued, her voice low, controlled. This time by the Valari, and not a word from the Pact. They've been siphoning resources from our colonies for months now. It's a coordinated effort, intentional, strategic. Elias' jaw clenched. He'd known it was coming. He'd feared it for months. The intelligence reports had been thin at first, rumors that didn't add up, but the truth was clearer now. The Valari, once thought to be a shadow in the background, had been orchestrating their downfall from the start. They hadn't just manipulated. The Pact, they had been the ones pulling every string, every pawn. And humanity had been their target all along. Do we have confirmation? Elias asked, his voice hard. Enough confirmation to see their hand clearly, Morrow said, looking up from the display, meeting his gaze. But no one is ready to act on it. Not yet. We're too far down the chain. They want us to starve, to break, to fall in line. Her voice was sharp, but underneath it, there was something deeper.
Rage, but also regret.
The same regret that had taken root in Elias' heart. Humanity had been played like a fiddle, and now they were reaping the consequences. Elias took a step forward, the weight of his decision pressing down on him with every movement. He had hoped for peace, but he now knew that peace had been a thin veil to cover the brutality of the Pact's real intentions. He had lived through wars before, seen civilizations fall under the weight of corruption and deceit. But this was different. This was betrayal on a galactic scale. "They're playing us like pawns," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "But if they think we'll just fall in line, they're gravely mistaken." Morrow's eyes locked onto his. There was a fire in her gaze, one that he had come to respect over the years. "We can't keep waiting. We can't keep pretending that peace is a choice. It's a cage, Elias, and it's about to break." The tension in the air thickened as Elias considered her words. His mind raced through the possibilities, the military strategies, the cost of action versus inaction. He had fought for humanity's place in this galaxy, struggled with diplomacy, and watched every attempt slip through their fingers. But Morrow was right. The galaxy was fracturing, and Earth had to make it stand. They couldn't remain silent, waiting for the illusion of peace to continue while the galaxy watched. The time had come to strike back. "How soon can we mobilize?" Elias asked, his voice steady now, the commander returning to his core. "Already underway," Morrow replied without hesitation. "We've gathered support from the rogue units on the fringes of the galaxy. They're not tied to the Pact's rules. They fight for survival, just like we do. They know what's at stake." Elias nodded, a sharp, decisive gesture. The pieces were falling into place, and now there was no turning back. Humanity wouldn't beg for scraps at the table anymore. They would take what was theirs by force. "We'll need more than just rogue units," Elias said, pacing as his mind worked through the strategic moves. "We'll need intelligence, allies from within the Pact itself. We need to show the galaxy what happens when they push humanity too far." Morrow stepped closer, her voice lowering. "We've been waiting for an excuse, for a reason to make our move. But Elias ... This is more than just a strike. This is humanity's rebirth. We're not going to just fight. We're going to remind the galaxy who we are." The silence that followed was deafening. Elias stopped pacing, turning to face Morrow fully. He had lived in the shadow of the Pact for too long, watched as Earth bled its resources dry quietly, suffering while the rest of the galaxy looked the other way. The time for silence was over. "Let's make it clear," Elias said, his voice cold with resolve. "We strike first. No more waiting for permission. No more bending the knee. Humanity will show them what happens when they underestimate us." Morrow's lips curled into a grim smile. "Finally, a fight we can win." The ship's alert system suddenly blared, slicing through the tension like a blade. Elias turned toward the screen, and his heart skipped a beat. A fresh report came in, a visual confirmation from the outer rim. The Valari had mobilized their fleets. The battle had begun. The ship shook as it entered the asteroid field of the egress belt, a chaotic labyrinth of broken rock and dust. The stars outside the viewports were but tiny pinpricks of light, swallowed by the vastness of space. Inside the Sovereign, the crew moved with precise urgency, each step a sign of the looming storm that was about to break. It had been 2 weeks since Elias Wren and General Nadia Morrow made their decision, and the repercussions of their actions rippled through the galaxy like a shockwave. On the bridge, Elias stood with his arms folded, eyes scanning the tactical maps and intel updates. The Valari had shown their hand, and now humanity had no choice but to react. The mission was set, a deep strike into Valari-controlled space, a move so audacious that it could either shift the balance of power or doom them all. Earth's assets were stretched thin, their colonies barely holding on as they siphoned off what little resources the Pact had left to offer. Every decision felt like walking a knife's edge. "Commander, we've secured the first wave of rogue fleets. They're ready." Morrow's voice cut through the hum of the ship's systems. Elias turned toward her, the weight of their choices visible in the lines of her face. "Good. But we need more," Elias replied, his voice low. "This won't be enough. We're going up against the Valari. This strike has to be more than just a blow. It has to shatter them. We need to hit their core, break their stranglehold on Earth and the Pact once and for all. Morrow didn't hesitate. She was a warrior at her core, forged in the fires of countless battles. We'll do what we can. But our window is closing fast. The Valari know we're coming. We need to move before they can respond. The tension in the air grew thicker. Every move they made, every fleet they mobilized, put them closer to the edge of annihilation. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future of humanity itself. The communication console beeped, a signal coming through from their rogue allies on the fringes of the galaxy. Elias activated it, his eyes narrowing as the image of a grizzled man. With a cybernetic eye flickered on the screen. "Commander Wren, General Morrow," the man's voice rasped, his tone grim. "You've got a problem. The Valari are pulling in reinforcement ships we haven't seen before. They're big. Real big, and they're coming fast." Elias felt his heart sink. He had anticipated a retaliation, but this was different. The Valari had resources beyond what they had ever imagined. "How long until they're in position?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with urgency. 2 days, maybe less. They've got ships en route, and they'll arrive before your strike. Team can hit their target. Elias exchanged a look with Morrow. Time was not on their side. Every second they wasted allowed the Valari to build their defenses, to solidify their control over the galaxy. "We don't have 2 days," Elias said, turning back to the map. "We'll have to accelerate the timetable. I want every ship in position by the end of the day." "This is our chance to strike before they can lock down," Morrow nodded. "I'll get it done." As she moved to coordinate the strike, Elias stood in front of the viewport, staring at the endless black. The gravity of the decision settled over him like a heavy cloak. Every plan, every move they made now could alter the course of history. There would be no going back. He was about to unleash humanity's fury on the galaxy. But would it be enough? 2 hours later, the Sovereign dropped out of warp, emerging in the dark expanse of Valari-controlled space. A massive twisting nebula surrounded them like a natural shield, the perfect cover for what was about to unfold. Elias stood at the center of the command room, his fingers clenched at his sides, as he surveyed the fleet that had assembled under his command. They were a patchwork of ships, some salvaged from previous battles, others from the rogue forces that had joined the cause. They were humanity's last hope, and they were ready. "Command, we're in position." Morrow's voice crackled through the comms, sharp and steady. Elias nodded. "Initiate Phase 1. Let's show them what happens when humanity is pushed too far." The attack began like a storm. Waves of fighters and bombers surged from the Sovereign, slicing through the void toward the Valari's most vulnerable supply depot. The nebula shielded their approach, masking their movements from the Valari's sensors. As they got closer, the first wave of fighters broke through the clouds of debris, cutting a path through the enemy defenses. The Valari, still unprepared for such a brazen strike, scrambled to respond. But it was too late. Humanity's first blow landed with the force of a hammer, smashing into the heart of the Valari's supply line. Explosions rang out across the dark void as their ships detonated in a fiery display. The Valari's reinforcements were still days away. The tide of battle was shifting in their favor. "Phase 2 execute," Elias ordered. The second wave of humanity's forces, more heavily armed, moved in. The Sovereign herself was the spearhead, charging into the heart of the Valari fleet. As the enemy ships scrambled to regroup, they were met with the full wrath of humanity's might. Railgun fire tore through the fabric of space, puncturing the hulls of Valari ships with terrifying precision. The once unyielding forces of the Valari were now on the defensive, caught off guard by the ferocity of humanity's retaliation. The first time in centuries, the Valari were reeling. "General Morrow, we've got a problem," came a voice over the comms, cutting through the noise of battle. Elias' heart skipped a beat. It wasn't over yet. "What is it?" "We've hit their supply depots, Commander, but we've underestimated their response. Their fleets are coming in from multiple points. We've triggered the Valari's hidden reserve forces. They've got capital ships on the move more than we anticipated." The sudden appearance of the Valari's backup fleet sent a shockwave through the battlefield. Ships nearly 3 times the size of anything humanity had at their disposal descended like vultures, surrounding the Sovereign and its ragtag fleet. Elias' hand tightened around the console. They had gambled everything on this strike, and now they were staring down the barrel of a much larger war. "Time to push," Elias muttered. He turned to Morrow, who was already issuing commands to engage the enemy with everything they had left. The final phase of the plan had to go into effect now. There was no room for hesitation. If humanity was going to take this fight to the Valari, they would have to sacrifice everything. With one final rallying cry, Elias led the charge into the heart of the Valari's capital fleet, a force that could either ignite the fire of a galaxy-wide rebellion or end in a disastrous defeat. The blackness of space stretched out like an endless void, cold and indifferent, as the Sovereign and its ragtag fleet tore through the heart of the Valari-controlled sector. The battle had already shifted in humanity's favor, at least for the moment. Explosions lit up the darkness in fiery bursts, and the echo of laser fire crackled across the comms. Humanity had taken its first strike, but the Valari were not going to lie down. The Sovereign's shields flickered with each impact, each blast a reminder of the brutality that lay ahead. Inside the command center, the air was thick with tension. Elias Wren stood at the tactical console, his face bathed in the red glow of the battle map. His eyes flickered between the monitor and the viewport, tracking the movements of the Valari fleets. They were regrouping faster than expected. But what? Did they really know about their enemy? They had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they were about to learn the cost of that mistake. "Status update, General," Elias asked, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but there was no turning back now. General Morrow's voice was sharp as she reported. "We've hit them hard, Commander, but they're calling in their reserves. 3 Valari capital ships are inbound. We've disabled 2 of their supply stations, but they've got more in the outer sectors. They're planning a counteroffensive." Elias' gaze narrowed. It was no surprise. The Valari were nothing if not resourceful. But this wasn't the first time humanity had been backed into a corner. It had happened before, in the wars of the past, and they had always fought their way out. The galaxy thought humanity was a dying breed, weak and fractured. But now, for the first time, they were seeing something entirely different. They were seeing the power of a species that had survived the worst the universe had to offer. "We need to make a push," Elias said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We can't give them a chance to regroup. We hit them again harder this time." Morrow turned towards him, her eyes hard with resolve. "You're talking about pushing into the heart of their fleet, Elias. We've already triggered their countermeasures. Their fleets will be ready. It's suicide. I've already told you, peace is gone." "We're not waiting any longer," Elias replied, his tone unyielding. "Humanity's future doesn't hinge on diplomacy. It hinges on what we're willing to do right now. We strike again. We make them understand the price of underestimating us." Morrow's face softened for just a moment, a fleeting expression of respect, then her eyes hardened once more. "All right, Commander. You're right. If we're going to do this, we need to hit their leadership directly. Disrupt their command structure, take out their heart." Elias nodded. The plan was taking shape. The Valari had thought themselves untouchable, gods of war. But humanity wasn't a species to be worshipped. Humanity was a species to be feared. Deploy all remaining ships to the main Valari fleet, Elias ordered. We'll cut a path right through their command ship. I want everything we have focused on their central command. The crew moved with a practiced efficiency as the plan began to unfold. The Sovereign shifted position, its massive guns aiming toward the Valari flagship, the heart of their fleet. The tension was unbearable. Elias could hear the pounding of his own pulse in his ears as the ship's engines roared to life, pulling them faster toward the Valari stronghold. Outside, the darkness of space was lit by the firestorm that had become the battlefield. The rogue fleet surged forward, led by the Sovereign, tearing through the Valari defenses. Their fleet was vast, but humanity was swift, moving with the deadly precision of a predator that had learned how to fight and survive. The first wave of the assault hit hard. Ships exploded in fiery bursts, and laser beams sliced through the teeth. Darkness like deadly whispers. The Valari had not expected such brutality. They had underestimated humanity's hunger for vengeance. As the Sovereign advanced, Elias watched the screens. The Valari flagship loomed in the distance, a monolithic fortress of weaponry and power. The Sovereign's weapon systems hummed with energy, preparing for the final strike. But something felt off. The hair on the back of Elias' neck stood up as the readings on his console began to change. A warning flashed across the tactical map. Commander, we've detected multiple cloaked ships, large ships emerging from the flagship's blind spot, came Morrow's voice, crackling with urgency. They've been waiting for us. Elias' eyes widened as he processed the data. The Valari had prepared a trap to obliterate their forces in one devastating blow. A fleet of massive warships had been hidden in the shadow of the flagship, waiting for the right moment to strike. The Valari were smarter than they had let on. They had been waiting, patiently biding their time, and now they were springing there. Trap. Activate defensive shields, Elias barked, his mind racing. Full evasive maneuvers. We're not dying here. The Sovereign lurched as its engines roared, the ship swerving to avoid incoming fire. But the enemy ships were relentless. Every moment that passed brought them closer to the heart of the Valari fleet, but also closer to total destruction. The warships fired, their plasma cannons lighting up the darkness with brilliant, deadly flashes. Elias watched as a massive blast tore through one of their forward assault ships, reducing it to debris in an instant. It was chaos. The forces under his command were taking heavy losses, but still they fought on. Humanity had never known surrender, and this moment would be no different. We're close. Stay on course, Elias shouted into the chaos. His voice was a rallying cry, a beacon amidst the destruction. Just as the enemy closed in, Morrow's voice came through the comms once more, this time filled with grim determination. We've breached their perimeter. We're in range of the flagship's primary systems. Elias' heart raced. This was it. The final strike. Full power to the guns. Fire everything we've got. We're ending this now. The Sovereign unleashed a torrent of railgun fire, a storm of destruction that shattered the outer defenses of the Valari flagship. Explosions rocked the ship, lights flickering as their shields faltered under the onslaught. But they were far from finished. The flagship's return fire was devastating, tearing into the Sovereign's hull. Brace for impact. Morrow's voice rang out, but it was already too late. The Sovereign's shields flickered and cracked under the intensity of the barrage. Elias felt the tremor of the impact, the jolt of the ship being rocked by the sheer force. But they kept moving forward. The final moment of the battle came as the Sovereign slammed into the Valari flagship's heart. There was no grand victory cry, No speeches. Just the sound of metal screaming against metal and the hum of the ship's engines as the final wave of destruction swept across the battlefield. In the chaos, Elias stood, staring at the burning wreckage of the flagship. There were no cheers, no victory songs, only the quiet aftermath of a galaxy forever changed. Humanity had struck back, and this time they would not be forgotten. The remnants of the Valari flagship drifted like a ghost in the void, a shattered carcass of twisted metal and blackened hulls. The battle had been brutal, a testament to humanity's unyielding drive. The Sovereign hung suspended in the emptiness, battered and scarred, but still functional, its engines roaring like a wounded beast. The silence after the storm was almost deafening. Inside the command deck, the atmosphere was thick with exhaustion, but Elias couldn't allow himself the luxury of rest. The war had only just begun. The tactical display flickered before him, displaying the wreckage of the Valari fleet. The flagship was in pieces, and their remaining forces were scrambling to regroup, but it wasn't over, not by a long shot. As much as humanity had taken a victory here, it was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. "Commander," Morrow's voice broke through the heavy silence, her tone grim. Elias turned to face her. She stood by the halotable, her face lit by the flickering lights. The scars of the battle were etched into her expression, an experienced strategist, now the face of humanity's defiance. "We've disabled the Valari flagship, but their reinforcements are already on the move. They're coming in waves." Elias closed his eyes for a moment, taking a breath, steadying himself. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a battle for the soul of the galaxy. The Valari had underestimated humanity for too long, and now they were reaping the consequences. But their defeat was only temporary. The Valari wouldn't just fade away, and neither would the other factions of the Pact. "Where do we stand?" Elias asked, his voice steady, though inside he could feel the weight of the galaxy pressing on him. "We've made our point," Morrow said, "but they're not backing down. The Valari are rallying their forces, and Earth's allies are beginning to scatter. Some are calling for peace talks, others are calling for reinforcements. We're losing the momentum, Elias." Elias stared at the map. The Valari had taken a crippling blow, but they had resources more than humanity had ever anticipated. And now, factions within the Pact were starting to fracture. Some species were already aligning themselves with the Valari, either out of fear or political calculation. Humanity had stepped into the spotlight, but the question now was whether they could keep the stage. "We're at the crossroads," Elias muttered. "We either push forward and risk everything, or we wait for reinforcements that may never come." Morrow's eyes narrowed. "We don't have time to wait. The Pact won't sit idle. The Valari will be back with reinforcements, and Earth's leadership isn't holding up. They're crumbling under pressure." Elias clenched his fists. It wasn't just the Valari. It was the factions within humanity that still clung to the old way of thinking, the ones who believed in diplomacy and compromise, even when every shred of evidence screamed that peace was a mirage. The old politicians back on Earth, the ones who thought they could broker a deal with the Pact, were too weak. They hadn't seen what he had seen. They hadn't lived through the betrayals, the wars, the lies. "We need to act." "We can't keep waiting for permission," Elias said, his voice hard. "Get the fleet ready. I want every ship in position to hit their supply lines. We'll strike the heart of their reinforcements before they can even regroup." Morrow gave a single nod, her eyes flashing with the fire of a warrior ready for battle. "We're running low on resources. We can't sustain this for much longer. But if we move fast, we can cripple their ability to fight back." "Do it," Elias commanded, turning toward the viewport. His gaze swept over the stars, the cold vastness of space stretching before him like an endless battleground. The galaxy would soon know the price of underestimating humanity. He would make sure of it. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The Sovereign's engines hummed with purpose as it aligned with the rest of the fleet. Ships that had once been abandoned, remnants of humanity's previous defeats, now moved with purpose. Coordinated by a single mind, the resolve of a species that had been pushed too far, and was finally ready to strike back. As the fleet moved deeper into Valari-controlled space, Elias stood on the bridge, his eyes scanning the live feed from FOB, the tactical display. The Valari were reeling, but their forces were already regrouping. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something far worse than what they had already faced. His instincts told him to prepare for the unexpected. A crackling voice from the comms broke through his thoughts. "Commander, we've got an incoming fleet. Size is significant, likely Valari reinforcements. They've been hiding it from our scans, but we've just detected them coming out of the nebula." Elias' pulse quickened. This was it. The moment they had been waiting for. A final confrontation. "How long?" he asked, his voice calm despite the rising tension in his chest. 20 minutes to full engagement." "It's the flagship, the Vox Alter," came the reply. Elias didn't need to look at the tactical readout to know the significance of the Vox Alter. It was the heart of the Valari fleet, a warship the size of a small moon and the most heavily guarded ship in the entire Valari arsenal. Taking it down wasn't just a battle, it was a statement. If they could destroy the Vox Alter, the Valari's command structure would shatter, but Elias knew the cost. They would throw everything they had at it. The final battle had begun. Prepare for battle stations. "Target the Vox Alter," Elias ordered, his voice steely, unflinching. "We're not leaving anything to chance. Hit them with everything we've got." Morrow's eyes locked with his, a silent understanding passing between them. There was no more room for hesitation. No more waiting. Humanity had drawn the line in the sand, and the Valari were going to cross it. The next few moments were a blur of fire and destruction. The fleet moved in formation, cutting through space with deadly precision. The Sovereign surged forward, its railguns charging with lethal intent. The first salvo ripped through the Vox Alter shields, the ship's protective layers splintering under the sheer force. But the Valari weren't retreating. Their counterattack was swift, brutal. Plasma cannons tore into the Sovereign's hull, the ship shaking violently from the force. "Shields holding," the communications officer reported, his voice tense. "But they're reinforcing their defenses. We need to break through their armor if we're going to make a dent." Elias' fingers tightened around the railing. They were running out of time. The Vox Alter was massive, and their attacks weren't enough to pierce its core. But they had one advantage. The Valari never expected humanity to fight back like this. They never expected humanity to be this relentless. "Deploy the strike teams," Elias said, his voice cold with resolve. "We're going in." Morrow nodded, already issuing orders to the rest of the fleet. Strike teams, led by humanity's best, were ready to board the Vox Alter and strike directly at its heart, its command center. As the strike teams descended, the Sovereign's cannons fired one last devastating shot. The Vox Alter's shields shattered, and the massive ship groaned as its hull cracked open, spilling debris into space. The battle wasn't over yet, but humanity had taken its first step toward victory. The message was clear. Humanity had finally drawn a line in the stars. The Sovereign drifted through the remnants of the Vox Alter, its battered hull limping through space as the debris from the wrecked Valari flagship scattered around them. The light from distant stars cast long, eerie shadows across the deck. The battle had been costly, and though the Valari's strongest ship had been destroyed, it was far from a victory. The galaxy was watching, but what they didn't know was that the real fight, humanity's fight, was only just beginning. Inside the command deck, Elias Wren stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable as the final reports came in. The Vox Alter's destruction had shaken the Valari, but it was just one of many pieces in the puzzle. The heart of their fleet had been severed, but the rest of the galaxy had not yet realized the shift. The treaty, the fragile peace between the Pact and humanity, was still held together by a single thread. And every faction, every empire that had once underestimated humanity would soon have to face the consequences. Elias' thoughts were interrupted by a low chime from the console. A new communication. He moved quickly to accept it, his eyes narrowing when the face of Admiral Kira Drake appeared on the screen. Her face was drawn, her eyes hard, as though the weight of the galaxy was bearing down on her. "Commander Wren," she greeted him, her voice calm, but Elias could hear the tension. "I've received new intelligence from our scouts. The Valari are regrouping. They're not finished." Elias exhaled slowly, his gaze steady. "I didn't think they would be." "We were right to take down the Vox Alter," Drake continued. "But now we're seeing the true extent of their resources. They've launched covert operations across several neutral zones, stirring up conflict, inciting chaos. And worse, I've just received word from Earth Command. They're pushing for peace talks." "Peace talks?" Elias' tone was sharp, incredulous. "They still want to negotiate?" "They do," Drake said, her lips tightening, "and the Council is splitting. Some factions are willing to abandon our campaign to secure a treaty with the Valari. They think we can make peace with them if we just show restraint. They're losing their nerve." Elias gritted his teeth. He could feel the frustration welling up inside him. Peace talks? After everything humanity had gone through? After the massacre at Turnus 4, the betrayal, the countless lives lost? Humanity had fought for survival, only to have Earth's leadership want to sit at the table with the very species that had tried to wipe them out. "No," Elias said, his voice low but full of authority. "We're not negotiating with them, not after what they've done. They've already shown us who they are." "Agreed," Drake replied, "but we're not the only ones caught in this. Our allies, the ones who rallied to our side, they're starting to waver. If we don't act soon, we could lose them." Elias stared at the screen, his mind racing. The Valari had been the most immediate threat, but they weren't the only danger humanity faced. The factions within the Pact, the neutral worlds watching, waiting to see which side would win, were just as unpredictable. And the longer humanity delayed its offensive, the more the galaxy would turn on them. "Tell the fleet to prepare for a full-scale assault," Elias ordered, his voice resolute. "We can't wait for peace talks. The Valari may be scrambling, but their reinforcements will come. We need to strike now before they can regroup. We'll take the fight to them, hit their supply lines, cripple their remaining fleets. The galaxy needs to see that humanity is no longer playing by their rules." 2 hours later, the fleet was in position, moving swiftly through the quiet expanse of space. The coordinates for the Valari's main supply depot, a massive station built into the core of an asteroid, were locked. This was humanity's chance to hit the Valari where it would hurt the most, cutting off their resources and leaving them vulnerable. As the Sovereign neared the depot, Elias stood at the bridge, his eyes scanning the vast emptiness beyond. Weight of the situation was clear. The Valari would not stand down. The galaxy, once teetering on the edge of peace, was now teetering on the edge of full-scale war. And humanity, for better or worse, was the catalyst. The fleet dropped from warp, emerging in the shadow of the massive asteroid field that surrounded the Valari depot. The station loomed in the distance, a monolithic structure bristling with weaponry, its power core glowing bright against the black of space. Its defenses, though formidable, were not prepared for what humanity was about to deliver. Elias gripped the armrest of his chair, his pulse quickening as the tactical map flickered before him. The countdown was ticking. Status? Shields are active, Morrow's voice came through, steady and sharp. We're within range of the first set of turrets. Deploying strike fighters now. The ship shuddered slightly as the Sovereign's weapon systems powered up, the low hum of its guns filling the room. It was time to move. We're clear, Morrow continued. All systems go. Our fighters are engaging the first wave of defenses. Elias nodded. Stay focused. We've got one shot at this. No mistakes. The fleet surged forward, fighters and bombers racing toward the station. The Valari opened fire, their weapons tearing through space, trying to hold the line. But humanity's strike force was relentless. Each wave of fighters cut through the Valari defenses like a knife through flesh. The Sovereign's railguns unleashed a barrage of deadly fire, obliterating the first layer of the station's outer defenses. Target the core, Elias barked. We need to shut this station down before they can send out reinforcements. The Sovereign broke through the final layers of the station's shields, its weapons now focused on the glowing core at the heart of the station. The Valari fired back, but their shots were wild, desperate. They had no time to recalibrate. Elias watched as the first of the station's reactors detonated, sending a shockwave through space. The Sovereign rocked violently, but held steady. Another reactor exploded, then another. The Valari were on the brink, but there was no time to celebrate. All forces, fall back. Morrow shouted as the remaining Valari ships in orbit began to regroup. We've done enough damage. Get to the extraction point. But as humanity's fleet began to withdraw, something unexpected happened. From the darkness beyond the asteroid belt, an enemy force appeared, a massive fleet, far larger than anything humanity had expected. The Valari had been hiding their reinforcements, and now they were here. Elias cursed under his breath. It's a trap. They've been holding this force in reserve, waiting for us to act. The space between the two fleets closed rapidly. The Valari had brought their full might to bear. Their warships were colossal, their firepower devastating. Prepare for battle, Elias shouted. We're not backing down now. We fight or we die here. Humanity's fleet, battered but not broken, turned to face the oncoming storm. The Sovereign's engines roared to life, and the fleet charged, unleashing a hellstorm of firepower at the Valari reinforcements. The galaxy would remember this moment. Humanity had taken the first step, but now they would face the full fury of an empire unwilling to bow. The chaos of the battlefield seemed endless. The silence after the first explosions was a fleeting memory, drowned out by the shrill hum of weapon fire, the crackling of shields, and the roar of ships in combat. The Valari had thrown everything. They had left at humanity's ragtag fleet. Their reinforcements were numerous, their ships massive, but humanity's fighters were relentless. The Valari had long ruled the stars with an iron fist, but now they faced something they hadn't accounted for, a species that refused to die, no matter the odds. Elias Wren stood on the bridge of the Sovereign, staring out at the violence unfolding. In space, the Vox altar had been destroyed, the symbol of Valari supremacy reduced to rubble. But the Valari weren't finished. They had regrouped faster than expected, and now they had humanity on the defensive. The Sovereign was battered, its shields nearly depleted, but it still stood. The fleet still fought. We're losing ground. Morrow's voice crackled through the comms, cutting through the tension on the bridge. Her tone was calm but edged with frustration. They're pushing us back. We need a new strategy, Elias, or we'll be overrun. Elias didn't reply immediately. He was lost in the thrum of the battle, his mind working through the possibilities. There was no more room for hesitation. No more time for half measures. They had already proven they could break the Valari's control. Now they had to show the galaxy something more, that humanity wasn't just a force to be reckoned with. They were a force that would carve out their own future, no matter who stood in their way. The communication console blinked, drawing Elias from his thoughts. The face of Admiral Kira Drake appeared on the screen, her face grim, the battle raging behind her. Commander, we've lost contact with the rogue fleets. The Valari have activated a jamming field. We're cut off, Drake said, her voice tight with urgency. Elias' eyes narrowed. Damn it, they're playing us like pawns again. They've got a new weapon, something we didn't anticipate. We've never seen anything like it. It's pulling in our ships, disorienting our fighters. If we don't do something fast, we'll lose everything we've gained, Drake continued. We need to cut the jamming field. Without it, we can't coordinate our attack, and their reinforcements will wipe us out. Elias' fingers curled into fists. The Valari were relentless, and they had something new, something that could tilt the balance of the war. He glanced at Morrow, who had been silent, watching him with an unreadable expression. We go in, Elias said finally, his voice low but resolute. We destroy the jamming device. It's time to take this fight straight to their heart. Morrow's gaze was intense, understanding the gravity of his decision. This could be our last shot, Elias. If we fail, we're done. We won't fail, Elias said firmly. It's time humanity takes back the galaxy. The Sovereign plunged deeper into the heart of the Valari fleet, the jamming signal growing stronger, drowning out communications and wreaking havoc on their systems. Elias stood at the helm, eyes fixed on the dark void ahead, the weight of the galaxy's future pressing down on him like a stone. They were about to take the most dangerous step yet. Deploy all fighter squadrons, Elias ordered. Get them to the jamming station. We take that down, or we all die trying. The tension on the bridge was palpable as the fighters launched. In a coordinated wave, ripping through the dark expanse toward the heart of the Valari fleet. The Sovereign followed closely behind, its massive form a beacon in the chaos of space. The jamming station was nestled in the heart of a floating fortress, guarded by layers of Valari defense ships and drones. They're not making this easy for us, Morrow muttered, watching the tactical readouts. Incoming enemy fighters 20. Ships. Elias didn't flinch. Focus fire on the jamming station. We break their lines, we break their advantage. The Sovereign's cannons roared, cutting through the space around them. The massive warship fired relentlessly at the Valari defenders, each blast tearing into their ranks, but the jamming station remained out of reach, protected by a fleet of elite warships. The ship rocked violently as the Valari fighters collided with their lines. The space around them became a maelstrom of explosions, flashing light and deadly precision. Every move counted now. Evasive maneuvers, Elias commanded. The Sovereign twisted and turned, dodging enemy fire, its weapons continuing to rip apart the Valari defenses. But the closer they got, the more it felt like they were being pulled into a trap. General, they're sending reinforcements from the Vox Altar, Drake reported, her voice cutting through the chaos. We're running out of time. We can't pull back now, Elias growled. We finish this. The fleet surged forward, the Sovereign leading the charge. Fighter. Squadrons dived through enemy fire, narrowly avoiding explosions as they closed in on the jamming station. The moment they reached it, the sky exploded in fire as the Valari's reinforcements arrived. Every corner of space seemed to be filled with enemies now. Shut down the jamming device. Elias barked. Now. The strike teams deployed, boarding the Valari fortress with deadly precision. Every step they took was met with fierce resistance from the Valari soldiers, but they fought through it. Humanity's fury was unmatched. The jamming device loomed ahead, a massive engine of destruction. The strike teams tore through its defenses, planting charges on the core. 30 seconds, Morrow's voice came through. We need to get out of there now. Elias didn't need to be told twice. He barked orders to the remaining ships, his voice a roar against the backdrop of war. Full retreat. Get out of here now. As the charges detonated, the jamming station erupted in a massive explosion, the shockwave cutting through the Valari fleet like a knife. Their ability to coordinate their attack was gone, and the Valari were left reeling. The fleet's lines fractured, giving humanity a chance to regroup and strike once more. The Sovereign raced back toward the center of the battlefield, the damage to its hull severe but not fatal. Elias stood at the bridge, watching as the Valari's scattered forces tried to regain their composure. Their jamming network was shattered, their reinforcements disrupted. But now it was time for humanity to press the advantage. All ships, full speed ahead. We finish this now, Elias commanded. Humanity's fleet surged forward again, fighting with a ferocity that could not be matched. The Sovereign led the charge, its railguns firing with deadly precision. The Valari were breaking under the pressure, and when their flagship, the last remaining symbol of their power, fell under the weight of humanity's assault, the galaxy watched as the unthinkable happened. Humanity had not only survived it, had made its mark on the stars. Back on Earth, news of the victory spread like wildfire. The once dominant Valari Empire was in ruins, and humanity had emerged as a force to be reckoned with. But Elias Wren knew the war was not truly over. The galaxy was still a powder keg, and humanity was still a young spark in the vast, cold universe. But one thing had changed. The galaxy no longer underestimated humanity, and neither would it ever again.